Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining me. Today, we're going to explore what it really takes to make open source foundations self sustaining, not just in terms of software, but in terms of people, purpose, and resources. I'm Patrick Masson, Executive Director of the Apereo Foundation, and I want to challenge the assumption that free software means free labor. Our code is free, but our time, skills, and expertise shouldn't be. A little bit about Apereo, if you're not familiar with our work. Apereo's mission is to increase the awareness, adoption, and development of open source software in education. All of our projects have origins in higher education. Let's start where open source began. As Eric Raymond said in The Cathedral and the Bazaar, every good work of software starts by scratching a developer's personal itch. This idea, solving your own problem, is at the heart of open source's origins. Most early contributors were users first, not vendors or service providers. Think of Richard Stallman, who wanted greater control of MIT's new Xerox printer, Larry Wall, who created Perl to automate tasks while at Unisys, or the Apache HTTP server being patched by web sysadmins for sysadmins. These weren't passion projects, entrepreneurial startups, investments for new business. They were purpose driven for their own use, built because someone needed them to work so they could do their real jobs. But own use wasn't just a motivator, it was also a sustainability model. Companies paid engineers to improve tools they used. Think IBM and Linux, Google with Android, or Red Hat with GNOME. They paid staff to improve the tools they relied on. This institutional backing ensured long term viability. They weren't supporting the projects, they were rightly, selfishly scratching their own itch. And we see this reflected in the research. A 2012 study shows that own use was the primary motivator for contributors. It wasn't about giving back or even building community, it was about making your own life easier. This is the crucial point. When open source code contributions align with personal needs, even if part business or organizational work, support follows. And I should be clear here, the support is in the form of code and arguably funding by possibly third parties, employers, research grants, etc., who at the end of the day are paying for the work. The key to sustainability is not just passion, it's purpose tied to actual use. Stephen Weber pointed this out over 20 years ago. Open source software has often been a byproduct of paid work, not a hobby, not a launch of a startup. Developers were building common tools as part of their jobs and sharing the work across industries. Everyone is creating websites, and web servers alone don't create industry advantage. So we might as well all use and maintain the same, thus reducing our own costs. Thus, open source is a byproduct of other primary work. In roads and bridges, open source is infrastructure, and infrastructure needs maintenance. The problem is both developers and adopters have moved away from those support practices. In fact, a 2021 study shows that own use motivation has declined over time, while motivations related to personal benefits have increased. A key insight from that 2021 study shows own use, while still a strong motivator, has declined overall, while motivations that complement professional development and opportunities that foster greater pay, career advancement, increased reputation, and learning are increasing. These are powerful, but they're not sustainable on their own, don't always align with long term project needs, or address funding realities. This chart shows how motivations diversify over time. While this is healthy for building communities, it poses challenges for sustainability. We need systems that support contributors even if they're not scratching their own itch. Today, open source is no longer just infrastructure, it's strategy. Microsoft, Google, Meta, but just as relevant for startups and small to medium businesses, they all invest in open source because they see it as providing a competitive edge. innovation through customization, or even starting parking their own projects, pace of development to drive, even lead a sector, to ease entry into new markets. Indeed, emphasizing again own use motivations at a corporate level, but not those expressed by developers. The concept of own seems to have changed in open source over time. From Webster's, own is defined as an adjective used to stress something used to stress doing something without the help of another person. As a verb, it is to have or hold as property, to possess, or even to have power or mastery over, to dominate. In the early 2000s, it was mostly undifferentiated infrastructure. Linux, MySQL, Apache was used by everyone. Using Linux or Apache doesn't give Walmart an edge over Target. No one ever said, I buy my printer paper at Target because I really like their IT stack. But in the 2010s, the motivations and those who were motivated changed. Tech companies and providers began customizing, contributing to, and commercializing open source to gain strategic advantages. Companies now invest strategically in open source software to control roadmaps, ecosystems, and standards. But ironically, many of the projects that they rely on still are maintained by volunteers or underfunded teams. Strategic differentiation through open source creates competitive advantages, driving innovation to capture markets. But this innovation isn't always driven by the projects or foundations. Rather, it's by the adopters. If projects and foundations want to continue to cultivate communities of collaboration for co creation, we need to find another sustainability model, moving away from own use and we own the use motivations. So, to review, open source software moved from being community infrastructure to strategic a- assets. Companies began customizing and scaling localized variants. Now, leading an open source software project means influencing the direction of entire industries. How many foundations versus companies do you see doing this? Think of Google's influence with Kubernetes, or Meta setting the standard with React, or AWS forking various projects. Think of Google's AGPL policy, community source, and open core business models. Corporate own use software doesn't thrive in open source ecosystems. They thrive on open source practices, on open source developers, and on open source communities. It's leverage. And these projects are only sustainable because they align with business value. So, how do we support the rest of the ecosystem? The projects without corporate backing. We adopt their model. We need to think beyond donations. We need foundations to act like entrepreneurs, offering services, tools, support for value. Read those bullet points again. Do these describe how foundations work or how tech companies in open source ecosystems work? Like bridges, if we don't maintain them, they collapse. So the question is, how do we maintain the maintainers? But I have another definition of maintainers, not supporting individuals, just like I wouldn't support individual companies. Rather, I define maintainers as the community that supports the projects. So we ask, how do we maintain the maintainers? The answer is self sustainability, not relying entirely on grants, annual sponsorships, or other soft money, but building services to create value, sharing resources to reduce costs, and investing in expertise to drive innovation and direction that supports both the values of open source and the mission of the project or foundation. We can't rely on the goodwill alone. Open source software must be funded through real work, education, training, support, and infrastructure. Gratitude doesn't pay contributors. Let me share some concrete entrepreneurial ways open source foundations can generate revenue without relying solely on donations or grants. All of these are service foundations are uniquely equipped to provide. These aren't stretch goals, these are within reach. Self sustainability doesn't mean going it alone. It means charge for services rooted in project community foundation expertise, extend capacity through shared cross community, develop partnerships with diverse subject matter experts to create expand offerings, and share non technical infrastructure to reduce costs. Crucially, it means realizing that contributing code, organizing events, or training others is real labor, and it can generate real value, not just for a project or foundation's internal community, and not even just external organizations that rely on the project or foundation's work. Any organization that values open source software, development, or communities and wants to engage authentically would benefit from working with, paying for a foundation's services and experts. Here are some examples: event toolkits and white label conferences. This should be an easy one to conceptualize. Many projects already run events, host meetups, and organize conferences. For others outside your organizations, expertise in engaging open source communities, even those not affiliated with your project, has real value and it's worth paying for. Offer training and certificates like Linux Foundation Kubernetes certs. You already have expertise. People are willing to pay for certifications. Charge companies for your brand commercially. This is an example Moodle undertakes, an open source learning management system that requires those who want to use the Moodle mark to advertise their support of the learning management system to pay a percentage of their revenue. Run innovation labs. Help others launch open source projects the right way with governance, docs, and licensing support. Host, build pipelines, CI/CD, and software bill of material ready services, a trusted supply chain offering. Can provide ecosystem insights, version, use health metrics to commercial users. Referrals, provide contacts to companies that are interested in getting uh, support from those that are actually working on the project. Neutral IP and governance help companies open source their code the right way. Long-term support provide enterprise-ready builds for organizations. Mentorship and community coaching, helping those new to open source and self-sustainability understand and adopt these approaches. Build and release engineering services, and more, often exclusive to your project or foundation. For example, at Apereo, we could offer support around online learning, educational technology, LTI standards and integration, instructional design, applying for research grants in ed tech, and more. So to close, open source is no longer just a model for building software. It's a model for building value. And we have to treat it that way. If we want our foundations and our maintainers to thrive, we need to support them, not just with gratitude, but with infrastructure, investment, and income. Thank you. I'm Patrick Masson, and I'd love to hear your ideas on building more sustainable open source for the future. Thank you.